a Chinese paramilitary officer standing guard outside the North Korean embassy in Beijing. Roman PilipeyEuropean Pressphoto Agency SOFIA, Bulgaria. While the embassies of most countries promote the interests of companies back home, North Korea's are in business for themselves. A series of tough sanctions by the United Nations and an executive order recently signed by President Trump have sought to economically isolate the nuclear-armed regime of Kim Jongun. But Pyongyang has held on to an array of profit-making ventures, some of which operate in the roughly 40 embassies of the Hermit Kingdom. Many of these enterprises are hard to trace, but at least one is impossible to miss. For years, neighbors have complained about the noise coming from a large fenced-in building here in a southern section of Bulgaria's capital city. It hosts parties a few times a week, many of them capped off with a late-night flurry of fireworks, shot from the roof. It isn't loud now, one neighbor, Bonka Nikolova, said as a parade of wedding guests filed into the building. But if they paid for fireworks, there will be fireworks. Ms. Nikolova has called the police, but there isn't much they can do. The building, filled with gilded halls that can be rented for events, enjoys a kind of diplomatic immunity courtesy of its owner, the government of North Korea. North Korean embassies have spent decades running cash-raising schemes, nearly all of them illicit under current international law. Diplomats and their underlings have brokered deals for weapons and drugs, and more mundane products like machine tools and cows. They have also smuggled liquor, cigarettes, luxury cars and anything else that can be imported duty-free and then sold it again. The North Korean embassy in New Delhi. Manan VatsyayanaAgence FrancePresse. Getty Images. The North Korean embassy in Sofia, Bulgaria, is a large fenced-in building in a southern section of the city. Dimitar Katsarov for the New York Times. My late father-in-law was an ambassador, said Marcus Noland, who studies North Korea and is executive vice president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and he told me that in India, years ago, it was known within the diplomatic corps that if you wanted to buy beef, you could knock on the back door of the North Korean embassy in Delhi. They ran an abattoir in the basement. Earning money is a necessity for the embassies. North Korea doesn't fund them. Instead, they are expected to support themselves and send home any surplus. Despite the sanctions it is under, North Korea did $6.5 billion in trade last year. Analysts estimate that embassy revenues represent a small sum compared with the country's other low-profile foreign ventures. Those included cadres of bodyguards leased to dictators who don't trust their own citizens, laborers dispatched to work sites around the world who must remit their wages, and state-owned companies that export ballistic missiles and other arms to countries like Syria. In some cases, diplomats get involved with weapons deals. The third private secretary of the North Korean embassy in Beijing doubled as an employee of the Pyongyang trading company. The company, according to a United Nations report, supplied surface-to-air missiles and radar systems to Mozambique. Pyongyang also sold machine tools, and an ad in 2014 for those products on a Chinese website listed the company headquarters at the same address as the North Korean embassy in Beijing. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs did not respond to faxed questions. Diplomats for the country have been ad hoc entrepreneurs since at least 1976. That year, Norway's police found through surveillance that every member of the North Korean embassy in Oslo was involved in the import and sale of as many as 10,000 bottles of spirits and 100,000 cigarettes. Today, sanctions have forced many embassies to curb their ambitions, with some intent on keeping the lowest possible profile. The North Korean embassy in London sits unobtrusively in Ealing, a suburb-like section of London, just another brick house in a row of them. The difference is a small sign, barely visible from outside the wrought iron fence residence and office. Embassy of DPR Korea. Aside from black luxury sedans in the driveway, there are rarely signs of life in the building, even to neighbors. I've never seen anyone go in or out of there, said Ali Wiseman, a student who lives in a group house 2 doors down. And I've been here a year. His roommate, Rupert Thompson, has seen people there. I once saw 3 women working on the lawn out front and they did everything to not look at me, he said. The way that the London embassy sustains itself is a mystery. One theory comes from Kim Jongun, a former member of the North Korean military who defected and moved to London in 2007. He said he often saw embassy employees at a type of Sunday flea market called a car boot sale. They are always there buying second-hand electronics, toys, dolls, kitchen goods, Mr. Kim said through an interpreter, seated at a restaurant he owns in a London suburb. Some of these things they are cleaning up and fixing to resell, others they are sending home to North Korea. North Korean embassies in the former Eastern Bloc, where the missions were long ago granted generous square footage, have a more lucrative stratagem. The event space known as Terror Residence in Sofia, the former home of the North Korean ambassador, it hosts parties a few times a week, many of them capped off with fireworks shot from the roof. Dimitar Katsarov for the New York Times, the company that leases terror from the North Korean embassy, said it froze its payments after the United Nations approved stricter sanctions. Dimitar Katsarov for the New York Times, in Poland, 40 businesses are listed at the address of the North Korean embassy in Warsaw, including a pharmaceutical company, several advertising agencies and a yacht club. How many of these businesses are actually staffed there is unclear. In Sofia, the embassy owns a number of buildings on two separate properties. One is a complex that includes the embassy itself. Passers-by can pause at a glass display case, standard issue for embassies in the city, filled with photographs. One captures the supreme leader beaming at a crowd, others were of missiles that had just been launched. The event space, known as Terror Residence, is a 15-minute walk east. It's the former home of the North Korean ambassador, built in the 1980s with dazzle instead of comfort in mind. Photos on Terror's promotional website show an interior that is essentially a communist take on Versailles, a series of huge and austere halls with chandeliers, gold curtains and paintings of ballerinas. Terror rents out the space for magazine photo sessions, music videos and television ads, including a handful for national banks and one for the Bulgarian version of Celebrity Apprentice. Its main business is weddings, proms, and corporate events. Few attendees, it seems, realize they are spending the evening on North Korean property. I knew it was a former embassy building, but I had no idea it was owned by North Korea, said Belyana Dimitrova, who attended a friend's wedding at Terror in September. The atmosphere was very pleasant. A spokeswoman for Terror, Zanilia Baklova, wrote in an email that the company has had a long-term lease with the Embassy of North Korea that predates the imposition of economic sanctions. When the UN approved stricter sanctions this year and last, Terror froze its payments, she said. The company has not been evicted, she wrote, because of the considerable amount of money it had spent on renovations and upkeep. Emails to the embassy were not returned. Some countries have succeeded in shutting down businesses that rent from North Korea. In May, Germany closed a youth hostel that was operating in what was originally North Korean diplomatic quarters. The governments of Poland and Bulgaria have so far been unable to end the ancillary activities. A spokesman for the Bulgarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it had repeatedly raised the issue of renting out space with North Korean officials here, urging them to use properties in Sofia solely for diplomatic and consular activities. Terror, unlike its landlord, has tried to become a more agreeable neighbor. People who live across the street say the notices are now taped on the doors of their apartment building a day before there will be fireworks, giving a heads up and promising that the show will end by 10 p.m. Surprisingly, a residents didn't seem particularly vexed about living near an enterprise that has pumped money into the world's most repressive and notorious regime. But that may say more about Bulgaria's government than the dangers of North Korea. When you live in a place where it's so difficult to get even trivial stuff done, said Bonka Nikolova, it's hard to worry about World War III. Joanna Berendt contributed, reporting from Warsaw, Ryan McMorrow from Beijing and Boriana Djambazova from Sofia, Bulgaria. A version of this article appears in print on October 8, 2017, on page A1 of the New York edition, with the headline "North Korean embassies host proms and sell cows for cash."